Chapter 60. The Precious Treasured Sword. What lay before Hiroshi left him utterly speechless. It was an ancient treasured sword, sheathed in a black scabbard, with a color that spoke of its long history. It was carefully placed on a sword rack, hidden away so discreetly that if not for Hiroshi's wandering gaze, he might never have noticed it blending into the shadows. Hiroshi approached, extending his hand to lift the ancient blade from its rack. A chill ran through his fingers as he grasped the handle and drew the sword with a resonant clang. The blade gleamed coldly in the dim light of the warehouse. This was an ancient treasured sword. The blade was straight like a sword, with a slight curve at the very end, blending the regal spirit of a sword with the dominating aura of a saber. As he held it before his eyes, Hiroshi felt a sharp sting as though the blade's aura pierced his vision. This was undoubtedly a magnificent weapon, a formidable killing tool. The ancient treasured sword was one of the most renowned swords of the Tang dynasty, forged with the most advanced techniques of its time. The blade was robust and sharp, capable of being wielded by both infantry and cavalry. Japan's famous katana was originally modeled after the ancient treasured sword during the Tang dynasty. However, the craftsmanship of ancient Japan couldn't compare to that of the Tang dynasty, resulting in katanas that, while sharp, were incredibly brittle and prone to breaking. Eventually, they had to adapt, creating curved blades to increase their durability. The ancient treasured sword was considered a pinnacle of sword and saber craftsmanship in Chinese history. Due to its high cost and the difficulty of maintenance, few genuine pieces had survived over the years. Holding this sword, Hiroshi could sense the ancientness imbued in its steel. It was a peculiar sensation, as if he could touch the centuries it had endured. 1,000 years ago, this sword might have been gripped by a valiant general, slicing through enemies on the battlefield, leaving a trail of fallen foes. Every boy dreams of wielding a sword and roaming the martial world. Hiroshi was no exception. He stood silently for a moment before swinging the sword lightly towards a nearby shelf. With a crisp snap, a 3 mm thick iron corner was cleanly sliced off. The cut was smooth, with no rough edges, sharp enough to cut through iron like butter. This must have been looted from some collector, destined for the black market overseas. The European Union once looted many Chinese artifacts for auction, a militia member remarked, watching Hiroshi with the ancient treasured sword. "We've saved another piece of our heritage." "I want it," Hiroshi declared, sheathing the sword with a decisive tone. The food, clothing, and spices in the warehouse held little appeal to Hiroshi. Only this sword captured his heart. From the moment he saw it, he knew it had to be his. The militia members were taken aback. While the antique sword was appealing, in this post-apocalyptic world, food was paramount. They couldn't understand why Hiroshi would prioritize an old sword over essential supplies. They didn't realize that the ordinary food in the warehouse was merely animal feed on Hiroshi's farm. He, Kiko, and Benji were accustomed to high-quality, radiation-resistant food. Eating common food again would be nearly intolerable. Unbeknownst to Hiroshi, his choice of the sword instead of food was perceived as an act of selflessness by the militia. They believed he was foregoing the essentials out of consideration for their well-being. This display of integrity and greatness moved them deeply. In their eyes, Hiroshi, who had led them through life-and-death battles and reclaimed their food, was now relinquishing his share because of a mere antique. It was a gesture of such nobility that it made them all the more determined to honor him. Believing they understood his intent, the militia divided the warehouse's supplies evenly among themselves, setting aside the largest share for Hiroshi, an enormous pile of snacks, rice, and flour. Half an hour later, as Hiroshi stood outside examining the ancient treasured sword, he learned of the militia's decision. He couldn't help but smile wryly. Seeing their sincere expressions, he realized that declining further would only cause awkwardness. After a moment's silence, he accepted their offering. "Though we've eliminated wells, we must remain vigilant. At nightfall, we'll transport the supplies home in batches, ensuring we remain hidden. We must also dispose of the bodies to prevent discovery. Even though they were bandits, we need to keep this operation secret to avoid retaliation," Hiroshi instructed firmly. Cleaning up after the battle was crucial. Our enemies were part of a large criminal organization. Wells Group is just one of many small factions in River East Province. If word gets out, they could send more to retaliate. Despite the remoteness of their location, they couldn't risk someone stumbling upon any traces. Secrecy was essential to prevent the remaining gang members from seeking revenge, which could jeopardize their hard-won security and resources. Hiroshi knew that surviving this period was critical. With time, he could develop his farm further, amassing enough points to trade for more warriors and weapons. Soon, he could arm the entire town. If the enemies dared to return, no matter their numbers, Hiroshi would ensure they never left alive.